Have you ever been so desperate to escape someone that you would do anything? For Alara Vance, a 26-year-old illustrator living in the heart of New York City, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday. The man she was running from wasn't a monster from a horror film, but a far more terrifying demon, her ex, Marcus Thorne, a man who refused to let her go. In a blind panic, standing in a crowded coffee shop, she did the unthinkable. She lunged forward and threw her arms around a complete stranger, burying her face in his chest. But she had no idea that the stranger whose life she had just crashed into was Julian Sterling, and that one desperate, impulsive hug was about to ignite a firestorm of passion, danger, and intrigue that would change their lives forever. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind on Bleecker Street chimed a sound Alara Vance usually found comforting. Today it was a death knell. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of soft indie music and the hiss of the espresso machine. She had seen him through the rain-streaked window, Marcus Thorne, her ex. He was standing across the street, his signature smirk playing on his lips, that look of predatory ownership in his eyes that still haunted her dreams. It had been 6 months since she'd finally broken free. 6 months of him texting, calling, and accidentally showing up wherever she was. He was a master of psychological warfare, making her feel like she was the crazy one, the one overreacting. But the cold knot of fear in her stomach was real. He started crossing the street. Panic, sharp and icy, seized her. She couldn't run. He'd loved the chase. She couldn't confront him. His voice had a way of shrinking her down to nothing. Her eyes darted around the crowded cafe, searching for an escape, a shield. And then she saw him. A man standing near the counter, waiting for his order. He was tall, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored grey suit that probably cost more than her rent. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and he was staring intently at his phone, a picture of calm detachment in the bustling room. He was a fortress. Without a second thought, fueled by pure adrenaline, Alara moved. She closed the distance in 3 quick strides, and before her rational mind could scream in protest, she threw her arms around him from the side, pressing her face into the surprisingly soft fabric of his suit jacket. It smelled of bergamot and clean rain. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry I'm late," she exclaimed, her voice a pitch higher than usual, laced with a tremor she hoped sounded like breathless affection. The traffic was an absolute nightmare. The man went rigid. She could feel the solid wall of his chest tense up, his entire body freezing in surprise. For a horrifying second, she thought he would shove her off call security and expose her lie to Marcus, who had just walked through the door. She risked a glance over the stranger's shoulder. Marcus stood there, dripping, his smirk faltering as he took in the scene. He saw her wrapped in the arms of another man, a man who radiated a quiet authority Marcus could only ever imitate. Alara tightened her grip, burying her face again. "I missed you so much," she whispered into the stranger's chest, the words both a plea and a performance. A low, controlled voice rumbled against her ear. "It's all right. I'm here now." The response was so unexpected, so calm, that it took her breath away. He didn't push her away. He didn't question her. He played along. He even slightly angled his body, shielding her more completely from Marcus's view. She felt a large, warm hand rest gently on the small of her back, a gesture of quiet reassurance. She could feel Marcus's stare burning into them. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, the bell chimed again. Alara held her breath, praying it was him leaving. When she dared to peek, Marcus was gone. The torrent of relief that washed over her was so powerful, her knees felt weak. Slowly, mortifyingly, she began to untangle herself from the stranger. She pulled back her face, flaming with a blush that she was sure reached the roots of her hair. Now she had to face him. His eyes, a startling shade of deep blue, were not angry but intensely curious. They scanned her face, taking in her wide, apologetic eyes and the lingering fear she couldn't quite mask. I'm so incredibly sorry," she stammered, her hands fluttering uselessly. "I can't explain. I can, but you'd think I was insane. You have every right to be furious." He simply watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then a corner of his mouth ticked upward in a ghost of a smile. "Is your ex the one who looks like he belongs on a billboard for toxic cologne gone?" The bluntness of it shocked a laugh out of her. "Yes. Yes, he's gone. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." "Julian," a barista called out, placing a single black coffee on the counter. The stranger, Julian, nodded to the barista before turning his attention back to her. "I take it this happens often enough," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm Alara. And I owe you a new suit or a coffee or a lifetime supply of something. You saved me. Don't worry about the suit," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. He picked up his coffee. "But I might take you up on that coffee sometime, as repayment for my services as an emergency boyfriend." He gave her another small, genuine smile. It transformed his face, making him look less like an intimidating CEO and more like someone she might actually want to have coffee with. Before she could form a coherent response, he was turning to leave. "Wait!" she called out, a new wave of panic hitting her. Your coffee? Let me buy it." He paused at the door, turning back. "Consider it a down payment on the one you owe me. Have a better day, Alara." And then he was gone, disappearing into the grey New York drizzle, leaving Alara standing in the middle of the daily grind, her heart still racing, but for an entirely different reason. In her haste and confusion, she didn't notice that her small, leather-bound sketchbook had slipped from her tote bag and now lay forgotten on the floor, right where the mysterious Julian had been standing. The adrenaline from the encounter with Marcus, followed by the bewildering kindness of the stranger, Julian left Alara feeling shaky and disconnected for the rest of the day. Back in her small, art-filled apartment in the East Village, she tried to lose herself in a freelance illustration project, but her mind kept replaying the scene. The feel of his suit, the solid strength of his arm around her, the calm timbre of his voice. She was both mortified by her own audacity and deeply, profoundly grateful. It wasn't until that evening, as she was packing her bag for the next day, that she realized her sketchbook was missing. Panic, cold and familiar, washed over her again. That book was her life. It contained months of work character sketches, random thoughts, and the raw emotional drawings she'd made in the painful aftermath of her breakup with Marcus. Losing it felt like losing a part of her soul. She tore her apartment apart, her search growing more frantic with every empty drawer and cleared off shelf. Finally defeated, she sank onto her worn velvet couch, her head in her hands. She retraced her steps. The office, the subway, the coffee shop, the daily grind. It must have fallen out when she'd accosted that poor man. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. An unknown number. She normally ignored them, but on a desperate whim she answered. "Hello, is this Alara Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was deep and professional, not the voice she was half hoping to hear. "Yes, this is she. My name is Arthur Covington. I'm the executive assistant to Mr. Julian Sterling. I believe you met him this morning. You seem to have left a sketchbook behind. He found it and asked me to contact you to arrange its return." Relief and confusion warred inside her. Julian, he'd found her book. But an executive assistant, Mr. Sterling. How did you get my number? Your name was on the inside cover, and a business card was tucked into the back pocket. Ms. Vance. Mr. Sterling is a very resourceful man. There was a hint of pride in the assistant's tone. He'd like to return it to you personally. He suggested coffee to settle the debt you mentioned. Alara's mind raced. An executive assistant, a resourceful man, the suit, the quiet confidence. Who was this guy? Yes, of course. That would be great. They arranged to meet the next afternoon at a quiet cafe in south of Houston Street, one much sleeker and more minimalist than her usual haunt. Alara spent the next 24 hours in a state of nervous anticipation. She told herself it was just about getting her sketchbook back, but a larger part of her knew it was more than that. She was intrigued by the man who had been her unwitting savior. She arrived 5 minutes early, her hands clammy. Julian was already there, seated at a small table in the corner, her sketchbook resting beside him. Today he was dressed in dark jeans and a simple, charcoal grey cashmere sweater. The casual attire did nothing to diminish the aura of power that clung to him. If anything, it made him seem more dangerously handsome. "Alara," he said, standing as she approached. His smile was warmer this time, reaching his sapphire blue eyes. "I'm glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, her voice genuine as she looked at her sketchbook. "You have no idea how much this means to me." "Thank you. I think I have some idea," he said, gesturing to the book as they sat down. "I hope you don't mind." I glanced at the first few pages to identify the owner. "You're incredibly talented." A flush of pleasure and embarrassment warmed her cheeks. "It's just doodling, really." "I disagree," he said, his gaze direct and serious. "You capture emotion. That's a rare skill." Their coffees arrived, and the conversation flowed with an ease that stunned her. He didn't mention the bizarre circumstances of their first meeting again, for which she was grateful. Instead, he asked about her art, her life in the city, her dreams. He was an incredible listener, attentive and insightful, his questions showing he was actually hearing her answers, not just waiting for his turn to speak. She, in turn, learned small things about him. He enjoyed sailing. He had a passion for architectural history. He spoke of his work in vague but compelling terms, mentioning logistical challenges and global market strategies. He cleverly sidestepped any direct questions about what exactly he did. Alara, caught up in their rapport, didn't press. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen not as an accessory or a project, but as a person. As they were getting ready to leave, an hour had melted away into what felt like minutes. So she said, clutching her return sketchbook to her chest, "Now that my debt is paid, does this mean I won't see you again?" The question was bolder than she'd intended, but she couldn't help it. Julian's smile widened. "I was rather hoping we could move from a debtor-creditor relationship to something more conventional. Dinner Friday night." Her heart gave a joyful leap. "I'd love that." They parted ways on the sidewalk, a tangible current of promise hanging in the air between them. Alara walked home on a cloud, her mind filled not with fear of Marcus, but with the exhilarating possibility of Julian. That evening, curled up on her couch, she let her curiosity get the better of her. She'd only learned his full name from his assistant, Julian Sterling. On a whim, she typed it into a search engine, her breath caught in her throat. The screen was flooded with results. Photos of him at galas, ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, featured in articles from Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Headlines screamed at her, "Julian Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, revolutionizes global shipping. The elusive billionaire inside the Sterling empire. NYC's most powerful bachelor." Her world tilted on its axis. The kind, attentive man from the coffee shop was not just a successful businessman. He was a titan of industry, a billionaire. He lived in a world of private jets and penthouse apartments on Park Avenue, a universe away from her tiny East Village walk-up and freelance artist's salary. The warmth from their meeting turned to ice in her stomach. Why hadn't he told her? Was this a game to him? A slumming it experiment to see what it was like to date a normal person? Old insecurities, expertly planted by Marcus over the years, began to sprout like toxic weeds. "You're not good enough. You're out of your league." The man who had saved her from one complicated reality had just plunged her headfirst into another one that was infinitely more intimidating. And she had a date with him on Friday. The discovery of Julian Sterling's true identity sent Alara into a spiral of anxiety. The easy connection she had felt with him was now tainted by a paralyzing sense of inadequacy. What could she possibly have to offer a man who could have anything and anyone in the world? Every outfit in her closet suddenly looked cheap. Every story she could tell about her life seemed mundane. She almost cancelled the date 3 times. Each time she would type out the text message, her thumb hovering over the send button, only to be stopped by the memory of his eyes, the genuine interest and kindness she'd seen in them. He hadn't seemed like he was playing a game. She decided against her better judgment to go. She had to know if what she'd felt was real, or if she was just the latest curiosity for a bored billionaire. He had booked a table at a restaurant called Aria, a place so exclusive Alara had never even heard of it. It had no sign, just a discreet oak door on a quiet triangle below Canal Street. When she gave her name, the host led her not into a dining room, but to a private elevator. It opened directly into a breathtaking rooftop garden restaurant enclosed in glass, with a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. Julian was waiting for her, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark blue suit worn without a tie. He stood and kissed her cheek, a simple gesture that sent a jolt of electricity through her. "You look beautiful, Alara," he said, his voice a low murmur that cut through her nervousness. "This place is..." She started at a loss for words as she took in the view. "Unreal. I wanted somewhere we could talk without being interrupted," he explained, guiding her to the table. The meal was a blur of exquisite food and wine, but Alara barely noticed. Her mind was a whirlwind. She felt like an imposter, a little girl playing dress-up in a world she didn't belong to. She was quiet, her earlier easy banter replaced by stilted one-word answers. Julian noticed the change immediately. Halfway through their main course, he put down his fork and looked at her, his expression serious. "Alara, what's wrong? You've barely said a word all night. If this is about what happened with your ex, if he's bothered you again..." "No, it's not him," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's you." His eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Me. What did I do?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I Googled you, Julian." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by an expression she couldn't quite read. It looked like resignation. He sighed, leaning back in his chair and running a hand through his hair. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "Afraid? Why wouldn't you tell me?" she asked, a hint of accusation in her voice. "Did you think it was funny? Watching me talk about my struggles to pay rent while you're probably deciding which of your summer homes to visit?" "No, Alara, never," he said, his voice firm, leaning forward again. "That's not it at all. Look, the name's Sterling. It changes things. The moment people know, they change. They either want something from me, or they make assumptions about me. Women I've dated, they either see me as a walking bank account, or they're so intimidated they can't be themselves. With you in that coffee shop, I was just a guy. And when we talked yesterday, it was real. I haven't had that in a very long time. I wanted to hold on to it just for a little while longer. His confession chipped away at her defensiveness. She saw not arrogance in his eyes, but a profound loneliness. The gilded cage. He was trapped in it, just as she had been trapped by Marcus, albeit in a very different way. "So the man who likes sailing and architectural history is real?" she asked softly. "He's the only part that is real," Julian replied, his voice laced with sincerity. "The rest, the CEO, the billionaire, that's a job, a responsibility. It's not who I am." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and steady. "I know this is a lot to take in, but please don't let my last name scare you away. The connection I feel with you has nothing to do with Sterling Industries and everything to do with Alara Vance." Her heart ached for him, for the isolation his fortune had built around him. All her anxiety, her feelings of inadequacy, began to melt away, replaced by a wave of empathy. He wasn't a god on a pedestal. He was just a man searching for something real. "Okay, Julian," she whispered, her fingers curling around his. "Okay." The rest of the dinner was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a new, more fragile intimacy. She asked him about the pressures of his life, and he answered honestly. He told her about the weight of his family's legacy and the constant scrutiny of the public eye. She in turn told him more about Marcus, about the slow, insidious way he had chipped away at her self-esteem, making her feel small and dependent. Julian listened, his expression hardening with anger on her behalf. "No one should ever make you feel that way," he said fiercely. "You're one of the strongest, most vibrant people I've ever met." When he took her home, he walked her to the door of her humble building. The contrast between his chauffeured Mercedes parked at the curb and her peeling front door was stark, but for the first time it didn't bother her. "I had a wonderful evening," she said, turning to face him. "So did I," he said, his eyes searching hers in the dim light of the entryway. "More than you know." He leaned in, slowly, giving her ample time to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers softly at first, then with a deepening passion that spoke of pent-up longing. It wasn't a kiss of power or possession, but one of tenderness and relief. It was a kiss that promised a beginning. But as Alara lay in bed that night, the ghost of his kiss still on her lips, a cold thought crept in. A man like Julian Sterling didn't just have a public profile. He had a family, a powerful old money family, who would undoubtedly have expectations for the kind of woman he should be with, and she was certain she wasn't it. Their story wasn't just about them anymore. She had a feeling the real storm was yet to come. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Alara felt like she was living in a dream. Julian was attentive, romantic, and surprisingly down to earth. He seemed to delight in her world as much as she was dazzled by his. They had pizza at her favorite hole-in-the-wall spot in Brooklyn, and he introduced her to the rarefied world of charity galas at the Met. He'd show up at her door after a long day of board meetings just to watch a movie on her lumpy couch, claiming it was more comfortable than his custom-designed home theater. He was slowly, methodically helping her rebuild the confidence Marcus had shattered. He praised her artwork, even commissioning a piece for his office, a large, abstract canvas that she poured all her newfound hope into. For the first time, Alara felt her future opening up, bright and full of possibilities. But shadows have a way of creeping in at the edges of even the brightest light. The first shadow was Marcus. After his initial retreat, he had been silent, a silence that Alara found more unnerving than his usual harassment. Then the strange occurrences began. A freelance gig she was counting on was suddenly cancelled, the client giving a vague, nonsensical reason. Her application for a prestigious art grant was rejected, though she'd been told she was a frontrunner. She couldn't prove it, but she felt Marcus's fingerprints all over it. He was pulling strings using the connections his wealthy family afforded him to sabotage her career from the shadows. It was his way of reminding her that he still had power over her life. When she told Julian, his face grew dark. "This stops now," he said, his voice cold with a fury she'd never seen before. He immediately put his own security team on it, asking them to discreetly investigate Marcus Thorne's activities. He wanted to protect her, to build a wall around her that Marcus couldn't penetrate. But Alara felt a chill of fear. She didn't want a war fought on her behalf. She just wanted to be free. The second, more formidable shadow was the Sterling family, specifically Julian's older sister, Serafina Sterling. Serafina was the acting COO of Sterling Industries, a sharp, intimidating woman with a reputation for being even more ruthless in business than her father had been. She was the gatekeeper of the family's legacy and its fiercest protector. Julian had warned Alara about her, describing her as cautious and overprotective, which Alara rightly translated as suspicious and judgmental. Their first meeting was engineered by Serafina herself, an invitation to a Sunday brunch at the Sterling family estate in the Hamptons. The sprawling Gatsby-esque mansion was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. As Alara stood in the grand foyer, feeling woefully underdressed in her simple sundress, Serafina descended the sweeping staircase. She was the mirror image of Julian, tall, dark-haired, with the same piercing blue eyes, but hers held an icy reserve. "So you're the artist," Serafina said, her voice dripping with condescension as she looked Alara up and down. It wasn't a greeting, it was an assessment. "Julian has told me so much about you." The implication was clear, none of it good. The brunch was a masterclass in psychological interrogation. Serafina's questions were cloaked in politeness, but designed to sting. "Alara, what an interesting name. Is your family from New York?" she asked, knowing full well Julian had told her Alara grew up in a working-class family in Ohio. "And your art, it must be so fulfilling. I imagine it's a rather difficult way to make a stable living." Every word was a subtle jab, a reminder of the chasm between their worlds. Alara parried as best she could, her answers polite but firm. Julian was a constant supportive presence by her side, squeezing her hand under the table, steering the conversation to safer topics, but he couldn't completely shield her from his sister's venom. The final blow came as they were leaving. Serafina pulled Alara aside under the guise of admiring the garden. "I want you to know that I've had a background check done on you," Serafina said coolly, not a trace of apology in her voice. "I know all about Marcus Thorne. I know about your student debt. I know about your family's financial situation. My brother has a good heart which makes him vulnerable. He sees a damsel in distress and wants to be the hero." She paused, her eyes locking onto Alara's. "I've seen women like you before. They see the Sterling name as a ticket out of their dreary lives. But I will not let you damage this family or my brother. Whatever game you're playing, I advise you to end it. You are out of your depth." The accusation hit Alara like a physical blow. A gold digger. That's all Serafina saw. The carefully constructed confidence she had been building over the past weeks crumbled into dust. The old familiar voice of inadequacy screamed in her head. The drive back to the city was silent and tense. Julian could feel her retreat, see the walls going up around her. "Don't listen to her, Alara," he said, his voice tight with anger at his sister. "She doesn't know you." "But she's right, isn't she?" Alara whispered, staring out the window, unable to look at him. "Look at me, Julian. Look at my life. And then look at yours. We don't make sense. Maybe I'm just a project for you." "A damsel in distress. Don't say that," he said, his voice pained. "That is the last thing you are to me." But the seed of doubt had been planted, watered by Serafina's scorn, and fertilized by Marcus's insidious sabotage. Alara was trapped. Behind her, the ghost of Marcus was trying to drag her back into a past defined by control and fear. Ahead of her, the world of the Sterlings loomed a cold, judgmental fortress she wasn't sure she had the strength to conquer. And in the middle was Julian, the man she was falling in love with, whose love might be the very thing that destroyed her. The aftermath of the disastrous brunch in the Hamptons was a cold front that settled over Alara and Julian's relationship. Serafina's words had burrowed deep under Alara's skin, echoing the worst of her insecurities. She found herself pulling away from Julian, questioning his every gesture. Was his generosity a form of control? Was his affection merely pity? The effortless joy they had found in each other was replaced by a strained caution. Julian, for his part, was caught in an impossible position. He was furious with Serafina, leading to a series of heated phone calls that only served to harden his sister's resolve. She saw his passionate defense of Alara not as proof of his love, but as evidence of how thoroughly he was being manipulated. The pressure from both sides began to feel suffocating. One evening, Marcus took his harassment to a new level. Alara was leaving her part-time teaching job at a community arts center when he cornered her in the dimly lit alleyway behind the building. "We need to talk, Ellie," he said, using the pet name she now despised. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His cologne, the one Julian had so accurately described, was overpowering. "There's nothing to talk about, Marcus." "Leave me alone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, her keys clutched in her fist like a weapon. "I see you're playing in the big leagues now." "Julian Sterling," he sneered, his charm replaced by a raw, ugly jealousy. "Did you tell him about us, about our plans, or do you just cry on his shoulder and pretend to be a victim? I made you Ellie. People knew who you were because you were with me, and I can unmake you just as easily." His threat hung in the air, thick and menacing. Suddenly, the headlights of a black sedan flooded the alley. A door opened, and one of Julian's security guards, a large, stoic man named David, stepped out. He didn't say a word, simply stood there, an immovable object. Marcus's bravado evaporated. He shot Alara a look of pure hatred before turning and disappearing into the night. Shaking Alara allowed David to escort her to the car. Julian had put a tail on her. The realization was a conflicting mix of gratitude and violation. He was protecting her, but he had done it without her knowledge. She felt less like a partner and more like a fragile asset to be guarded. She confronted him the moment she walked into his sterile, immaculate penthouse apartment. You had me follow Julian, who had been pacing with worry, stopped. To keep you safe. After what you told me about Marcus, I couldn't take any chances. So you made a decision about my life, my safety without even talking to me. She shot back, her voice rising. That's what he used to do. Julian Marcus. He'd decide what was best for me, what I could and couldn't handle. I didn't leave him just to fall into another cage, no matter how gilded it is. That's not fair, Alara, Julian said, his voice strained. I'm nothing like him. I'm trying to protect you from him. Or are you trying to protect your investment? She snapped the ugly words tumbling out before she could stop them. Serafina's poison was finally working its way through her system. Julian recoiled as if she'd slapped him. The hurt in his eyes was so profound it momentarily silenced her. Is that what you think this is? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That you're some acquisition? I don't know what to think anymore, she cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. Your sister thinks I'm a gold digger. My ex is trying to ruin my life. I'm surrounded by security guards and lawyers and money. I don't know where I fit in all of this. I don't even feel like myself anymore. The fight was brutal and raw, fueled by weeks of unspoken fears and external pressures. All their differences were laid bare on the cold marble floor of his apartment. He represented a world of power and control that she instinctively distrusted, and she represented a world of vulnerability and emotional chaos that he didn't know how to navigate without using the tools of his empire, money, and force. Maybe your sister was right, Alara finally said, her voice hollow and defeated. Maybe I am out of my depth. Maybe this was a mistake. The word mistake hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Julian didn't argue. The fight had drained him too. He just looked at her, his face a mask of pain and exhaustion. If that's what you believe, he said, his voice flat, then maybe you're right. It wasn't what she believed, not really. But in that moment, overwhelmed and heartbroken, running away felt like the only option. She turned and walked out of the penthouse, out of the elevator, and out of his life, leaving Julian standing alone in the deafening silence of his perfect empty home. The test of trust had come, and they had both failed. Leaving Julian felt like tearing out a part of her own soul, but in the days that followed, Alara tried to convince herself it was for the best. She craved the simplicity of her old life, even with its struggles. She changed her phone number to cut off any remaining ties to Marcus, and threw herself into her art with a desperate, feverish intensity. Her canvases became a battlefield of dark, swirling colors and fractured lines, a reflection of the turmoil inside her. Julian, meanwhile, was adrift. The silence from Alara was a constant, aching void. His work suffered. He was short-tempered in meetings, distracted and distant. Serafina saw his misery and for a fleeting moment felt a pang of guilt, but quickly suppressed it. She had done what was necessary to protect their family. In her mind, the temporary pain Julian felt was preferable to the long-term disaster Alara Vance would have surely brought upon them. It was Marcus Thorne who refused to let the story end. He had been watching from the sidelines, his spies in the city's gossip columns feeding him information. He knew about the breakup. It wasn't enough for him to have Alara back. He needed to utterly destroy the man who had taken her. He needed to punish Alara for daring to believe she could have a life better than the one he had offered. He decided to burn their worlds to the ground. He reached out to a notoriously sleazy journalist named Fletcher Reed, who worked for a tabloid called the New York Chronicle. For the right price, Reed could turn whispers into headlines. Marcus fed him a carefully crafted story, a grotesque tapestry woven from half-truths and outright lies. The story broke on a Thursday morning. The headline was explosive: Billionaire's bait, how aspiring artist Alara Vance cons her way into the sterling fortune. The article painted Alara as a cunning, manipulative social climber. It detailed her modest background and history of dating wealthy men, with Marcus positioned as a heartbroken victim she had callously discarded for a bigger prize. It included quotes fabricated by Marcus, where she supposedly bragged to friends about landing the ultimate whale. It even twisted her past relationship with him, suggesting she had left him because his family's fortune, while significant, wasn't in the same league as the Sterlings. But the most venomous part was the attack on her art. The article claimed that Julian's commission for his office was not a genuine purchase, but a payoff, a way to buy her silence and cooperation. It implied her entire brief rise in the art world was orchestrated and funded by Julian stripping her of the one thing that was truly her own, her talent. The story was a sensation. It was picked up by mainstream news outlets not as fact, but as a scandalous human interest piece. The private life of the elusive Julian Sterling. Ilara's face was suddenly everywhere. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment building. Her photo, a candid shot of her looking stressed and tired, was juxtaposed with glamorous red carpet photos of Julian. The narrative was set: the predator and the prey. The shame was a physical weight. Her friends called offering support, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of her apartment. Marcus had succeeded. He had unmade her. At Sterling Industries headquarters, the fallout was immediate. The board of directors was in an uproar. Their conservative blue-chip company was now embroiled in a sordid tabloid scandal. The company's stock took a small but noticeable dip. The story wasn't just about Julian's personal life anymore. It was affecting the brand. Serafina stormed into Julian's office, a copy of the Chronicle clutched in her hand. "I told you, Julian, I warned you this would happen. This is what she brings into our lives. Chaos, scandal." But Julian wasn't looking at the stock tickers or listening to his sister. He was staring at the newspaper, at the cruel, twisted words used to describe the woman he loved. He saw past the lies and saw the hand of one person, Marcus Thorne, and he saw something else, his own failure. He had let his pride and hurt get in the way. He had let Ilara walk away when he should have fought for her, fought with her. He remembered her words in his apartment: "I didn't leave him just to fall into another cage." He finally understood. He had tried to protect her, using his power, the very thing that made her feel trapped. He hadn't trusted her strength. A cold, clear resolve settled over him. This wasn't just an attack on Ilara. It was an attack on him, on his judgment, and on the one real thing he had found in a lifetime of artifice. "Get Arthur on the line," Julian said to Serafina, his voice dangerously calm. "Cancel my afternoon, and schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning at the Sterling Tower. It's time I set the record straight." Serafina stared at him aghast. "A press conference? Are you insane? You never speak to the press. You'll only add fuel to the fire." "The fire is already burning," Julian said, his blue eyes like chips of ice. "Marcus Thorne started it, but I'm going to be the one to finish it." He wasn't just going to deny the story. He was going to war, and he only hoped it wasn't too late to get the one person he needed on his side. While Julian planned his counterattack, Ilara was hitting rock bottom. Huddled in her apartment, the city's sirens a constant soundtrack to her misery, she felt completely isolated. Every buzz of her phone made her jump. The hateful comments online, the photographers outside it, was a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had done what Marcus and Serafina had both wanted she had run, and yet the fallout had followed her more destructive than she could ever have imagined. That evening there was a knock on her door. Not the loud, insistent banging of a reporter, but a soft, hesitant rap. She ignored it. It came again, more persistent this time. "Ilara, it's Julian. Please just give me 5 minutes." Her heart stopped. Hearing his voice through the wood of the door was both a comfort and a torment. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to nurse her wounds in private. But a flicker of the fight she thought she had lost sparked within her. She slowly unlatched the locks and opened the door a crack. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He wasn't the powerful CEO. He was the man she'd had coffee with, vulnerable and real. "What do you want, Julian?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I came to apologize," he said, his sincerity palpable. "I failed you, Ilara. I tried to handle everything with money and security because that's all I know. I didn't trust you. I didn't trust us. I let my sister and your ex get into my head, and I let you walk away. It was the biggest mistake of my life." He held up a hand as she started to speak. "I'm not here to ask you to take me back. I'm here because I'm going to destroy the man who did this to you, and I'm going to clear your name. But I won't do it for you. I want to do it with you, if you'll let me." He explained his plan for the press conference. He wasn't just going to issue a denial. His legal team had been working around the clock. They had uncovered a pattern of behavior from Marcus, 2 other women who had been harassed and intimidated after breaking up with him, both of whom were too scared to speak up. They also had financial records showing a large, untraceable payment made to the journalist Fletcher Reed. "But they'll twist it," Ilara said, her voice filled with doubt. "They'll say you bought those women's stories, that you fabricated the evidence." "They will," Julian agreed, "unless the truth comes from you. They've painted you as a victim and a villain. But you're neither. You're a survivor. And you are the strongest person I know. I need you to stand beside me tomorrow and show them who Ilara Vance really is." It was the ultimate choice. She could stay hidden and let this storm eventually pass, leaving her reputation in tatters. or she could step into the heart of the hurricane stand beside the man she loved and fight for her own truth, exposing herself to the world in the process. Looking at Julian at the unwavering belief in his eyes, she found her answer. For months she had been running, first from Marcus, then from the overwhelming reality of Julian's world. She was done running. Okay, she said, a new strength hardening her voice. Okay, I'll do it. The next morning, the press room at Sterling Tower was a media circus. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. When Julian walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. But the real gasp came when Alara walked out behind him, taking her place at the podium by his side. She looked pale but resolute, her hands clasped in front of her. Julian began, his voice calm and commanding. He laid out the facts, presenting the evidence of Marcus's harassment and the payment to the journalist. He didn't raise his voice, he simply stated the truth. These are the actions of a vindictive and cowardly man, Julian concluded. But the lies he told are not the most important part of this story. The most important part is the woman he tried to silence. He turned the podium over to Alara. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. She looked out at the sea of faces and cameras, and for a second she faltered. Then she felt Julian's hand on the small of her back, a quiet, steadying presence, the same way he had stood with her in the coffee shop, what felt like a lifetime ago. My name is Alara Vance, she began, her voice shaking slightly at first, then growing stronger with every word. For the last year I have been systematically harassed, intimidated, and manipulated by my ex-boyfriend Marcus Thorne. I'm not a gold digger, I'm a painter. My work is my own. And I will not allow a bitter, entitled man to take that away from me. She didn't just talk about Marcus, she spoke to anyone who had ever been made to feel small, to anyone who had been a victim of psychological abuse. Her story became universal. By the time she finished, the room was silent, the cynical reporters looking at her with a newfound respect. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The story shifted entirely. Marcus Thorne became the villain, his family's name dragged through the mud. Fletcher Reed was fired, and the New York Chronicle issued a full-page retraction and apology. The two other women, emboldened by Alara's courage, came forward with their own stories, and a restraining order was issued against Marcus, followed by a lawsuit that would cripple him both socially and financially. In the quiet of Julian's office, after the press conference, Serafina Sterling appeared in the doorway. She looked at Alara, her expression unreadable. I was wrong about you, Ms. Vance, she said, her voice stiff but sincere. You have a fortitude I did not expect. You are good for my brother. It was the closest Serafina would ever come to an apology, but it was enough. Alara and Julian stood by the vast window looking out at the city below. The storm had passed. So what now? Alara asked softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Now we build something real, Julian said, wrapping his arm around her. No more cages, no more shadows, just us. We can go to a gala at the Met, or we can get pizza in Brooklyn. As long as we're together, that's all that matters. She looked up at him, her heart full. She hadn't just found love in the arms of a stranger. She had found her own strength. She hadn't been rescued by a billionaire. She had stood beside him as an equal, and together they had faced the world and won. And so Alara and Julian's story wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something far more real and powerful. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes our most desperate moments can lead to our greatest destinies. They learned that trust isn't just about believing in another person. It's about having the courage to believe in yourself, even when the world tries to write a different story for you. Their love, born from a moment of panic and shielded from a world of judgment, became their unbreakable foundation. They didn't just fall for each other, they rose together, proving that the strongest empires aren't built on wealth or power, but on the unshakable bond between two people who choose each other against all odds. If this story of courage, love, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story of triumph, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that will capture your heart. Comment below and let us know what part of their journey resonated with you the most.
In the heart of New York City, where fortunes are forged and reputations are shattered, in a single evening, the annual Starlight Gala was the apex of the social season. Tonight, all eyes were on tech titan Diego Stafford and his new fiancée, a woman half his age with diamonds that glittered like her ambition. He paraded her like a trophy, a public declaration that his past, his quiet, unassuming ex-wife, Melanie, was nothing but a forgotten footnote. But in a world of curated perfection, a single moment can unravel everything. A gasp, a sudden silence, a turn of heads toward the grand entrance. Because the footnote just walked in, and she was about to rewrite the entire story. The Grand Astoria Ballroom was a testament to opulent excess. Light from three colossal crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, fractured into a million shimmering pieces, dancing across the gilded cornices and the sea of couture-clad guests below. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the carefully modulated hum of the city's elite. This was the Starlight Gala for Children's Health, an event where compassion was a currency and social standing was the ultimate prize. And tonight, Diego Stafford was winning. He stood near the sweeping marble staircase, one hand possessively on the small of his fiancée's back, the other holding a flute of Dom Perignon. At 45, Diego was a force of nature. His company, Stafford Innovations, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. He had a predator's smile, sharp and knowing, and eyes the color of cold steel that missed nothing. He had built his empire on ruthless acquisitions and an unerring instinct for weakness. His fiancée, Tiffany Dubois, was the perfect accessory to his success. She was 24, a former brand strategist, whose primary brand seemed to be herself. Her gown was a fiery red, Alexander McQueen, audacious and unforgiving, clinging to a figure honed by personal trainers and a disciplined diet of kale and ambition. A necklace of staggering canary diamonds, a recent gift from Diego, blazed at her throat. She laughed a sound that was a little too loud, a little too practiced, designed to draw every eye in her vicinity. "Darling," she purred, tilting her head back so the light caught the facets of her earrings. "Robert Carlyle from Forbes is staring again. He must be desperate for a quote about the merger." Diego squeezed her waist gently. "Let him be desperate. Tonight is about us. And of course," he added, with a magnanimous wave, "the children." His gaze swept the room with an air of supreme ownership. He saw the subtle nods of deference, the envious glances, the way people angled themselves to catch his eye. This was his world, a kingdom he had built from the ground up, and every piece of it was a reflection of his power, especially the woman beside him. Tiffany was everything his ex-wife Melanie had not been. She was vibrant, sexually confident, and utterly enamored with the public stage. Melanie. The name surfaced in his mind like a phantom, unwelcome and irritating. He hadn't thought of her in months, not really. Their divorce had been finalized a year ago, a clean surgical cut. He had been generous, of course. His lawyers had ensured the world knew just how generous he was. He'd given her the quiet suburban house they had once shared, and a settlement that to anyone else would seem immense. To him, it was a rounding error, the cost of shedding dead weight. He remembered their last meeting in the lawyer's office. Melanie had been so beige. Her sensible grey suit, her hair pulled back in a simple knot, her face pale and devoid of makeup. She had looked drained, a ghost haunting the edges of his vibrant new life. She hadn't fought him. She hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. She had just sat there, her hands clasped in her lap, her silence more unnerving than any tirade. "Is this what you want, Diego?" she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's what's necessary, Melanie." He'd replied, his tone clipped and final. "We've grown apart. I'm moving forward. You're not." The unspoken words hung in the air. "You're not young enough, not exciting enough, not beautiful enough. You are the starter wife, the cocoon I had to shed to become the butterfly." He had convinced himself it was true. She had been the quiet librarian's daughter. He'd met in college, the steady grounding force, while he was a chaotic storm of ambition. She'd managed their home, supported his early ventures with her small inheritance, and provided a calm refuge from his battles in the boardroom. But refuges become prisons when you want to fly. "I still can't believe she had the nerve to try and keep the Rothkos," Tiffany said suddenly, pulling him from his reverie. She was scrolling through her phone, a smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips. "I saw the auction results from Sotheby's. She sold them. Probably needed the money to fix the roof on that sad little house." Diego grunted. The two Mark Rothko paintings had been a point of contention. Melanie had a preternatural eye for art, a skill he'd once found charming and had even profited from. She'd bought the paintings years ago, long before their value had skyrocketed. She'd claimed they were a joint investment, bought with money from her family. His lawyers had argued otherwise. In the end, as part of the settlement, she had been forced to sell one, and he had kept the other, the larger, more significant piece which now hung in the lobby of Stafford Tower. She has no appreciation for what they represent, Diego said dismissively. To her, they were just colours on a canvas. To me, they represent vision, the foresight to acquire a masterpiece. He conveniently forgot that it was Melanie who had stood for hours in a dusty gallery, convincing a skeptical dealer that she, a young woman in a simple coat, understood the soul of the artist. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. A few couples drifted onto the dance floor. The atmosphere was one of serene, self-congratulatory elegance. Diego felt a surge of triumph. Everything was perfect. He had the business world by the throat, the most talked-about woman in New York on his arm, and the ghost of his past was exactly where she belonged in the past. Forgotten. Irrelevant. It was precisely at that moment, when his satisfaction was at its absolute peak, that the low hum of the ballroom began to change. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling, a subtle shift in the room's energy. A few conversations near the grand entrance faltered. Heads turned not with casual interest, but with a sharp, unified focus. The movement rippled inward, a wave of silent inquiry spreading through the crowd. Tiffany noticed it first. "What is it? Did a celebrity arrive?" she asked, craning her neck. Diego followed her gaze. A pathway was parting in the crowd, a silent corridor being carved through the sea of tuxedos and ball gowns. The guests weren't just looking, they were staring. Jaws were slack. Champagne flutes were held, forgotten halfway to lips. Even Robert Carlyle of Forbes had lowered his phone, his reporter's instincts replaced by simple, unadulterated shock. And then he saw her. For a disorienting second, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a character from a black and white film suddenly appear in vibrant, blinding technicolor. The woman standing at the top of the stairs was tall, poised her posture, radiating a calm authority that seemed to command the very air around her. Her hair, which he remembered as a simple brown, was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant waves that cascaded over one shoulder. Her face was luminous, her features sculpted by a subtle, masterful hand, highlighting the high cheekbones and intelligent eyes he'd once claimed to love. But it was the gown that was causing the collective paralysis. It wasn't just a dress. It was a work of art, a cascade of midnight blue silk organza and hand-embroidered platinum thread that seemed to have captured a piece of the cosmos. Thousands of tiny, meticulously placed diamonds and sapphires glittered within its folds, not with the gaudy fire of Tiffany's necklace, but with the deep, mysterious twinkle of a distant nebula. The gown flowed from a structured, corseted bodice down to a sweeping train that pooled on the marble floor like liquid moonlight. It was a garment that spoke not of expense, but of legacy. It was breathtaking. It was magnificent. It was Diego's mind calculated with the speed of a stock market algorithm, astronomically expensive. And the woman wearing it, the woman who was now descending the staircase with the unhurried grace of a queen, was his ex-wife, Melanie Price. The silence that had fallen over the Grand Astoria ballroom was profound. It was a heavy-weighted quiet, thick with shock and disbelief. The orchestra, sensing the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, trailed off mid-note, the last violin string seeming to hang in the air like a question mark. All the power, all the attention, all the ambient energy that had been orbiting Diego and Tiffany just moments before had now been captured by a new, irresistible gravitational force at the top of the stairs. Melanie descended. She didn't hurry. Each step was deliberate, poised her hand gliding lightly along the polished marble balustrade. Her expression was serene, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or malice. It was one of quiet confidence of a woman perfectly at ease in her own skin, in her own power. She wasn't looking at Diego. Her gaze was directed forward, scanning the room with a calm, appraising look, as if she were merely a guest arriving at a party where she knew she belonged. The gown was the epicenter of the spectacle. Whispers finally began to break the silence, starting in the back and rippling forward like a gathering storm. "My God, is that a Devereaux?" a woman with a Chanel tweed jacket hissed to her companion. "I thought he stopped designing." "Julian Devereaux." "No, it can't be. He hasn't done a private commission in 20 years. Look at the embroidery, the starlight pattern. That's his signature. That's not a dress, that's a museum piece." Julian Devereaux was a name whispered, with the reverence usually reserved for deities or ghosts. The legendary couturier had been the darling of royalty and old money dynasties before abruptly retiring at the peak of his fame, disgusted by the commercialism of modern fashion. He lived in monastic seclusion in a Scottish castle, rumoured to occasionally create a piece for his own artistic satisfaction, pieces that were never sold, only gifted or vaulted away. To wear a new Devereaux was not a matter of money, it was a matter of being deemed worthy by the master himself. And this gown was unmistakably new, a celestial masterpiece that made every other designer piece in the room look like a cheap imitation. Someone near the press line, a young fashion blogger with a rapidly growing following, was already typing furiously into her phone. Sources say the gown features over 10 zero assemblats hand-set diamonds and sapphires from a private collection. Early estimate at least $2 million, maybe more. The figure shot through the room via text messages and hushed exchanges, adding another layer of awe and confusion to the scene. $2 million, worn by Melanie Price, the forgotten ex-wife. Diego felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a feeling he despised, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the loss of control. He watched her, and it was like looking at a stranger. The Melanie he had discarded was a creature of earth tones and comfortable fabrics. She preferred books to parties' quiet nights to glittering galas. She would have considered a dress like this to be the height of frivolous absurdity. This woman, this vision descending the stairs, was someone else entirely. She had been remade, reforged in some unknown fire. Beside him, Tiffany was practically vibrating with fury. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of incandescent rage, her knuckles white as she gripped her clutch. "What is she doing here?" she spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "And what in God's name is she wearing? Did she blow her entire settlement on a single dress? How pathetic." But the words rang hollow even to Diego. This wasn't pathetic. It was a declaration of war. A silent, elegant, devastatingly effective coup. Melanie hadn't screamed or thrown a tantrum. She had simply arrived, and in doing so, had made Tiffany's ostentatious diamonds and fiery red dress look cheap and desperate. She had stolen the spotlight without saying a single word. As Melanie reached the bottom of the staircase, a collective breath was released. She paused, and for the first time, her eyes swept over to where Diego and Tiffany stood. There was no flicker of pain, no hint of longing. There was only a cool, detached recognition, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture that had been rearranged. Her gaze lingered on him for a barest second before moving to Tiffany, taking in the McQueen dress and the canary diamonds with an almost clinical lack of interest. Then she gave a small, polite nod, a gesture of distant civility, and turned away. The spell was broken. The room erupted into a cacophony of excited chatter. People were no longer looking at Diego. They were looking at Melanie, trying to catch her eye, trying to understand the impossible transformation. The city's most influential figures, men and women Diego had spent years cultivating, were now gravitating toward his ex-wife. He watched in disbelief as Michael Beaumont, the elderly patriarch of a real estate dynasty, a man famously impervious to social climbing, moved to greet her. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect. "Mrs. Price," Beaumont said, his voice carrying in the relative quiet around them. "An unexpected pleasure. You look magnificent." "Mr. Beaumont," Melanie replied, her voice the same one Diego remembered, yet imbued with a new timbre of confidence. "Thank you. It's for a wonderful cause." She was a natural. She moved through this crowd with an easy grace, fielding compliments with humility and engaging in conversation with an intelligence that was drawing people in. She spoke to a curator from the MoMA about the nuances of post-war expressionism. She discussed philanthropic strategy with the chairwoman of the gala, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of the charity's work. Diego felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. This was the Melanie he had deliberately forgotten, the brilliant, perceptive woman who could hold her own in any intellectual circle. He had buried that memory under a narrative of her being plain and uninteresting because it suited him. He had wanted a beautiful ornament, not an intellectual equal. Now her brilliance, which he had once found stifling, was on full display, and the world was captivated. "Do something," Tiffany hissed, digging her nails into his arm. "She's making a fool of us. Go over there. Put her in her place." Diego knew it was a terrible idea. Confronting her now, while she was the center of this magnetic pull, would make him look petty and weak. But seeing the smirks on the faces of his rivals, the speculative looks from journalists, the sheer, unadulterated awe directed at the woman he had cast off, it was intolerable. His ego, the engine of his entire existence, demanded he reassert his dominance. He straightened his bow tie, plastered his predator's smile back on his face, and began to move toward her, Tiffany trailing in his wake like a furious shadow. He would remind her and everyone else who she was. She was his ex-wife, a relic, and he was Diego Stafford, the king of this world. He just had to remind his subjects. The path to Melanie was like wading through molasses. The very air around her seemed thicker, charged with the energy of the crowd's fascination. As Diego approached, conversations lulled, and eyes shifted, sensing the impending collision. This was the drama they had been craving. The real reason many of them attended these events, to witness the rise and fall of fortunes, both social and financial. Melanie was speaking with Alistair Finch, a notoriously sharp and discerning British investor known for his Midas touch in the tech sector. Finch was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held a lifetime of shrewd calculations. He was the white whale of venture capital, and Diego had been trying to secure a meeting with him for 6 months, hoping to get Finch to invest in his new AI-driven satellite project. His assistant had been repeatedly rebuffed. Yet here was Melanie chatting with him, as if they were old friends. The ethical framework is the most crucial component, Melanie was saying, her tone earnest and compelling. Predictive analytics without a strong moral compass is just a high-tech weapon. The potential for misuse is staggering. Finch nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "A refreshing perspective, Mrs. Price. Most founders I meet talk about disruption and market share. Few mention morality." Before Melanie could respond, Diego inserted himself into the conversation, his smile wide and artificial. "Alistair, I didn't realize you knew my ex-wife." He placed a deliberate, condescending emphasis on the word ex. Alistair Finch turned his cool gaze on Diego. "I didn't. I'm having the pleasure of making her acquaintance now. We were just discussing the ethics of artificial intelligence." "Ah, ethics," Diego said, with a dismissive chuckle, clapping Finch on the shoulder. Melanie was always more of a philosopher than a businesswoman, an admirable, if not particularly profitable trait. He looked at Melanie, his eyes glinting with malice. "That's a rather spectacular dress, Melanie. You must have broken the bank. I hope you're managing your finances wisely." It was a low blow, a public insinuation that she was a foolish spendthrift living off his scraps. The small circle of onlookers held their breath. Melanie didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Diego," she said, her voice even and calm. "It's a Devereaux, a gift from the artist. And as for my finances," she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, "you taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson." The comeback was perfect. It was polite, it deflected his jab, and it contained a subtle barb of its own, hinting at a success he knew nothing about. Finch's eyebrow arched in appreciation. Tiffany, however, lacked any sense of subtlety. Seeing Diego's attack fail, she stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Melanie, it's so good to see you out and about. We were so worried. After the divorce, you just disappeared. It's wonderful that you're feeling up to all this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "The implication clear, you don't belong here." She then zeroed in on the dress. $2 million, they're saying. Honestly, I think it's a bit much, don't you? For a charity event, it almost feels like you're trying to make the cause about yourself. Diego and I believe in quiet, substantive giving. This was a direct attack on Melanie's character, painting her as a selfish show-off. Diego watched a cruel sense of satisfaction blooming in his chest. This, he thought, was how you handle her. Melanie turned her full attention to Tiffany. The shift was subtle, but the temperature around them seemed to drop by several degrees. She looked Tiffany up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment on the garish canary diamond necklace. "It's interesting you mentioned substantive giving, Tiffany," Melanie said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with an edge of pure steel. "This gala supports research into pediatric neurological disorders. It's a cause that's deeply personal to me. My younger sister Clara passed away from an undiagnosed glioma when she was 9. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The manufactured drama of the evening suddenly felt cheap and tawdry in the face of such a genuine, painful truth." Tiffany's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. She had tried to score a social point and had stumbled into a minefield of real grief. Melanie wasn't finished. "As for the dress," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "Julian Devereaux is an old family friend of my mother's. When he heard I would be attending tonight in Clara's memory, he insisted on creating something special. He called it Clara's Constellation. His gift, he said, was to ensure that no one would forget why we are truly here." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "So, no, I don't think it's a bit much. I think it's a tribute." She had not only defended herself, but had elevated the gown from a symbol of wealth to a memorial of love and loss. She had seized the moral high ground with such effortless grace that Tiffany was left speechless, her face flushed with humiliation. She had been exposed not just as catty, but as profoundly insensitive. Alistair Finch, who had been observing the entire exchange with the focus of a chess master, spoke into the silence. "A beautiful tribute, Mrs. Price, truly." He then turned to Diego, his expression now decidedly frosty. "Stafford, I believe my associate informed your office that my Q2 investment portfolio is fully committed. I won't have time for a meeting." Diego's smile froze on his face. It was a polite, public, and utterly brutal dismissal. Finch had just slammed the door on a potential $100 million investment in front of half of New York's financial elite. He hadn't just said no, he had made a point of saying it here now in the immediate aftermath of Diego and Tiffany's callousness. Diego felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He had come over to reassert his dominance and had instead been handed a devastating public defeat. He looked at Melanie, who was now graciously accepting a glass of water from a passing waiter, her composure absolute. There was a dangerous depth in her eyes he'd never seen before, or perhaps had simply refused to acknowledge. He had believed he'd shed his quiet, unassuming wife. But the woman standing before him was not a ghost. She was a queen, and she had just with devastating precision captured his king. The game, he was beginning to realize, had only just begun. Reeling from Finch's public rebuke, Diego retreated to the periphery of the ballroom, dragging a seething Tiffany with him. He needed a drink, something stronger than champagne, and a moment to recalibrate. The carefully constructed narrative of his evening of his life was fracturing before his eyes. "This is your fault," Tiffany hissed, her voice low and shaky with rage. "You were supposed to handle her. You let her walk all over you, all over us." "Be quiet," Diego snapped, his tone dangerously soft. He motioned to a waiter for a whiskey neat. "You're the one who brought up the dress. You walked right into her little sob story." "Sob story? She probably made that up." "Her sister?" Tiffany trailed off, realizing how monstrous she sounded. The problem was, she knew it was true. In the early days of their affair, Diego had once mentioned, in a moment of rare introspection, the shadow that the death of Melanie's sister had cast over her family. He had framed it as a source of her melancholy and risk aversion. Now Melanie had weaponized that same vulnerability, turning it into a shield of unimpeachable moral strength. Diego's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. The dress from a reclusive genius, the impossible poise, the instant rapport with a man like Alistair Finch. This wasn't a woman spending her alimony on a revenge dress. This was a calculated, strategic maneuver, and he had no idea what its objective was. The line she'd said to him echoed in his head. "You taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson." What investments? He had made sure the settlement, while large, wouldn't allow her to play in his league. He'd seen to it that her assets were mostly tied up in trusts and low-yield bonds managed by a firm loyal to him. He had designed it to be a comfortable cage, not a launch pad. Had she found a loophole? Meanwhile, across the room, Melanie was not basking in her social victory. She was working. After her conversation with Finch, she had been approached by several other key figures, including the technology editor for the New York Times and a prominent bioethicist from Columbia University. Her conversation was no longer about art or memories. It was about the future. Alistair Finch, having extricated himself from another conversation, made his way back to her side. "Mrs. Price," he began, his tone now one of pure business. "Your perspective on the ethical implementation of AI is not merely refreshing, it's vital. You speak with the authority of someone who is not just an observer. Forgive my directness, but what is it you do?" Melanie met his directness with her own. "Mr. Finch, after my divorce, I had two things in abundance: capital from the sale of some assets and time to think. I spent my life surrounded by beautiful things, mostly art. And I watched the art world become increasingly plagued by forgeries, uncertain provenance, and a lack of transparency that benefits criminals and cheats honest collectors." She paused, taking a sip of water. "My background is in art history, but my passion became technology, specifically how to apply it to solve this problem. Diego, my ex-husband, always saw my interest in art as a quaint hobby. He never saw its potential as a data set." Finch was listening intently, his mind clearly working. A data set. The largest, most complex, and most valuable data set in human history, Melanie confirmed. Every brushstroke, every canvas weave, every pigment composition is a unique signature. For the past year, I have been quietly building a company. We've assembled a team of the world's top art historians, materials, scientists, and most importantly, machine learning engineers. We've developed a proprietary AI that can analyze a piece of art at a microscopic level and determine its authenticity with a 99.98% accuracy rate, cross-referencing it against a blockchain-secured ledger of provenance we are building. She finally named it. We call it Veritas Art. The name hung in the air between them. Veritas, Latin for truth. It was a brilliant, elegant name for a company designed to bring certainty to a world of smoke and mirrors. Finch's eyes, which had been shrewd, now lit up with the unmistakable spark of discovery. This was what he lived for. Not just another social media app or a marginal improvement in data storage, but a true paradigm shift. A company that could disrupt and dominate a multi-billion-dollar global market. "You've kept this quiet," Finch stated, a hint of awe in his voice. "No press, no funding rounds. We've been operating in stealth mode funded entirely by my own capital," Melanie explained. "I didn't want the hype and speculation that comes with venture funding until the technology was perfect. We're finalizing our beta phase now. We've already uncovered 3 masterpieces in private collections that were in fact sophisticated forgeries, saving our initial clients over $100 million. This was the masterstroke. She wasn't just a founder with an idea. She was a founder with a proven, functioning, and highly profitable product. She had used her own money, taken her own risks, and built her empire in silence, right under Diego's nose. The Rothko she had been forced to sell, he suddenly understood. She hadn't sold it for living expenses. She had sold it for seed money. She had liquidated one masterpiece to build a machine that could verify all of them. From his vantage point, Diego could see the intensity of the conversation between Melanie and Finch. He saw Finch nod a slow, deliberate gesture of profound agreement. He saw him hand Melanie his private business card, not the one his assistant gave out, but his personal one. It was the venture capital equivalent of a knighting. "I have a feeling, Miss Price," Finch said, his voice low but clear, "that Veritas Art is going to change the world. My fund, Finch Global, doesn't just invest in companies. We invest in visionaries. I would be honored to be a part of your journey. My team will call yours on Monday. We will make you an offer that reflects the magnitude of what you've built." Diego felt a wave of nausea. He had been trying to get Finch's money for a speculative satellite project. Melanie had just secured it for a fully realized, world-changing company he never even knew existed. She hadn't just stolen his spotlight, she had stolen his future. He looked at his ex-wife, truly seeing her for the first time in a decade. The quiet, supportive partner he had called a philosopher had taken her passion, her intelligence, the very qualities he had belittled, and forged them into a weapon more powerful than any he possessed. He had built an empire of code and contracts. She had built an empire of truth and beauty. And at the biggest social event of the year, in front of everyone who mattered, she had just unveiled it. Not with a press release or a flashy presentation, but with a quiet conversation, all while wearing a $2 million gown that was nothing more than a beautiful distraction from her real power. The main event of the evening, the live auction, was meant to be the climax of the gala, a chance for the city's wealthiest to publicly display their generosity. For Diego, it was now a desperate last stand. He had been humiliated socially and outmaneuvered in business. His only remaining card was wealth, raw and overwhelming. He planned to make the night's largest donation, a spectacular headline-grabbing figure that would reassert his dominance and reduce Melanie's triumph to a footnote. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a rapid-fire delivery, worked the room, selling off luxury vacations, rare wines, and unique experiences. Diego sat with Tiffany at their front-row table, brooding. Tiffany was uncharacteristically quiet, scrolling furiously through her phone, her face tight with anxiety. The whispers about Melanie's tribute to her sister had made her a pariah for the moment. Every sympathetic glance thrown Melanie's way felt like an accusation against her. Finally, the grand finale item was announced. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final lot of the evening," the auctioneer boomed. "A truly priceless opportunity, a private one-on-one design consultation, and dinner with the master himself, the legendary, the reclusive, Julian Devereaux." A collective gasp went through the room. Devereaux hadn't made a public appearance in 2 decades. This was an unprecedented, almost mythical prize. The auctioneer explained that Devereaux, moved by the gala's cause, had agreed to this one-time exception with all proceeds going to the charity. Diego saw his opening. This was it. He would buy access to the man who had inadvertently become the symbol of his humiliation. He would own the connection. He would win. "We will start the bidding at $100,000, the auctioneer declared. Hands shot up immediately. 150, 200, 250,000. Diego let the amateurs play. He waited, letting the bidding climb past $500,000. When it slowed at 600,000, he raised his paddle. $1 million, he said, his voice ringing with authority. A hush fell over the room. It was an audacious, powerful bid designed to shut down all competition. But on the other side of the room, a shipping magnate with a point to prove raised his paddle. 1.1 million, Diego countered immediately. 1.5 million. The room buzzed with excitement. This was the spectacle they had been waiting for. The magnate hesitated, conferred with his wife, and reluctantly shook his head. The auctioneer's gavel was raised. $1.5 million going once, going twice. This was his moment of redemption. But before the gavel could fall, the chairwoman of the gala, a graceful woman named Beatrice Vanderbilt, walked onto the stage and held up a hand, speaking quietly to the auctioneer. He nodded his eyes odd and lowered his gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice said, her voice amplified by the microphone, "we have a brief and rather wonderful interruption. While the generosity on display tonight has been truly heartwarming, I have just been informed that we received a donation earlier this evening. A donation made privately without fanfare before the gala even began." She paused for dramatic effect. Diego felt a prickle of unease. "This single donation," Beatrice continued, her voice filled with emotion, "is the largest in the Starlight Gala's 20-year history. It is enough to fully fund the construction and staffing of a new state-of-the-art pediatric neuro research wing at the hospital, which will be named in memory of a young girl who lost her battle with cancer far too soon, the Clara Price Research Pavilion." The name hit Diego like a physical shock. Clara Price. Beatrice smiled warmly. The donor wished to remain anonymous, but in light of her presence here tonight, and with her gracious permission, we feel it is only right to acknowledge her. The $5 million donation was made by the founder of Veritas Art, Mrs. Melanie Price. If Melanie's arrival had caused a shockwave, this was an earthquake. The room erupted not into chatter, but into thunderous, sustained applause. People were rising to their feet, turning to face Melanie, their faces a mixture of awe and profound respect. Her $1.5 million bid was now rendered meaningless, a gaudy display of ego next to an act of transformative, silent philanthropy. He had tried to buy the spotlight, and she had already purchased the entire stage, the building, and the moral soul of the evening. Melanie, looking genuinely surprised by the announcement, simply inclined her head, a humble gesture that only amplified her grace. She had given a fortune in her sister's name and hadn't wanted anyone to know. As Diego sat paralyzed by this final checkmate move, a second more insidious crisis was unfolding at his own table. Tiffany's face had gone sheet white. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. A well-known gossip columnist, a woman Tiffany had snubbed earlier in the evening, just posted a story on her widely read blog. The headline was devastating. The Stafford fiancé's fairy tale passed more fiction than fact. The article, citing multiple sources from her hometown, methodically dismantled Tiffany's carefully constructed identity. She had not graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. She had attended a community college for 2 semesters. She was never a senior brand strategist at a top marketing firm. She had been an unpaid intern who was let go after 3 months. The story included quotes from former colleagues and even a screenshot of her old, unpolished LinkedIn profile before it was scrubbed and replaced with a fabricated history. The news spread through the ballroom with the speed of a digital virus. On phones hidden under tablecloths, the story was being shared, commented on, and dissected. The whispers started again, but this time they were laced with ridicule. "Did you see the whole resume is fake? But he's a tech genius. and he couldn't even run a background check on his own fiancée. He traded in a woman who builds empires for one who builds fairy tales. The facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces. Diego was sitting next to a fraud, a woman whose entire value was based on a lie. His judgment, his intelligence, his very perception, all of it was now called into question. He had paraded her as a symbol of his new, upgraded life, and she had just been exposed as a cheap counterfeit. The irony was so thick he could choke on it. He looked across the room at Melanie, now surrounded by admirers, Finch Beaumont, the gala chairwoman. She was bathed in a glow of authentic respect. Then he looked at Tiffany, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with terror and pleading. In that moment, Diego Stafford, the titan of industry, the king of his world, understood the full crushing weight of his defeat. He had lost everything that mattered tonight. The deal, the respect of his peers, his public image, and his own self-deception. He had thrown away a diamond and picked up a piece of glittering glass. The applause, a thunderous wave of validation for Melanie, finally crested and receded, leaving behind a silence at Diego's table that was more damning than any accusation. The air grew thick and heavy with what was unsaid. Around them, the ballroom was a hive of frantic, hushed communication. Phones glowed beneath tablecloths, their screens displaying the ruinous blog post. Glances sharp and fleeting, like thrown knives, cut across the room toward their table before quickly looking away. They were no longer guests. They were a spectacle of disgrace. Tiffany sat frozen, her face a kabuki mask of tragedy, the tears having carved pale channels through her expensive foundation. Her phone, which lay face up on the table, buzzed with a relentless, vicious rhythm. Each vibration a fresh wave of public scorn, another nail in the coffin of her fabricated life. "Diego," she whispered, her voice ragged. She reached for his hand, her touch tentative, desperate. "I can fix this. I'll release a statement. We can sue the columnist for libel. I can explain everything. It got out of hand. I just wanted to be good enough for you." Diego looked at her hand on his, then at her face. He felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, not even the heat of betrayal. All he felt was a profound, chilling disgust. She was a flawed product, a defective asset. Her lie wasn't the crime. The crime was her incompetence in maintaining it. She had allowed the pristine image he had curated for himself to be contaminated by her cheap, clumsy past. He pulled his hand away slowly. "There is no we," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, the finality of it more brutal than any shout. "You are a liability. I don't tolerate liabilities." He stood, the motion sharp and decisive. His chair scraped against the marble floor, a jarring, ugly sound in the suddenly quiet ballroom. He didn't offer her a hand. He didn't give her a backward glance. He simply turned and began his long walk toward the exit, leaving her to be swallowed by the silent judgment of the room. His stride was long and purposeful, his head held high in a defiant imitation of his usual arrogance. But it was a hollow performance. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, could sense the smirks and whispers that followed in his wake. The journey across the ballroom floor was a gauntlet of his own making. He passed a rival tech CEO, a man he'd gloated to just hours earlier, who now gave him a slow, pitying shake of the head. He saw a circle of society women, their faces a mixture of glee and mock sympathy, their whispers ceasing the moment he looked their way. This was what failure felt like, not a sudden crash, but a slow, agonizing corrosion of deference into contempt. He was halfway to the grand staircase, his escape almost in sight, when a figure stepped into his path, blocking his way as surely as a brick wall. It was Alistair Finch. The British investor stood with an air of immense stillness, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes holding no warmth, only a clear, piercing judgment. "Stafford," Finch said, His voice was not loud, but it cut through Diego's haze of fury and humiliation. A word of advice, if I may. Diego bristled, forced to a halt. I'm not in the mood for advice, Alistair. I imagine not, Finch replied, his tone dry as dust. But you'll want to hear this. For years, I've watched men like you operate. You worship at the altar of disruption. You measure success in market caps and brute force. But you consistently overlook the most valuable asset of all. It is not capital, nor technology, nor market share. It is integrity. Finch took a small step closer, his gaze unwavering. It's the bedrock upon which lasting empires are built. It cannot be bought, it cannot be leveraged, and it cannot be acquired in a hostile takeover. It must be earned, and once lost. He paused, letting the weight of the word hang between them. It is almost impossible to recover. You would do well to remember that. Before Diego could form a retort, Finch executed his final devastating maneuver. With a curt, dismissive nod, he turned his back on Diego and walked directly to where Melanie stood, preparing for her own departure. The move was a physical manifestation of the evening's power shift, a literal turning away from the disgraced past and toward the brilliant future. Diego stood rooted to the spot, watching as Finch, the man he had courted for months, approached his ex-wife with a reverence he had never been shown. Mrs. Price, Finch said, his voice now warm with genuine admiration as he took her hand. An absolute honor. My office will be in touch first thing Monday morning. I anticipate a very long and very profitable partnership. Thank you, Alistair, Melanie replied, her voice the epitome of grace. I look forward to it. The sight of it, the handshake, the mutual respect, the sealing of a deal that should have been his, was the final breaking point. The carefully controlled dam of his composure shattered. He had to understand. He pushed through a cluster of gawking guests, his movements clumsy with desperation, and confronted her at the base of the staircase. Melanie. The name was a raw, guttural sound, torn from his throat. She turned to face him fully. She was no longer a ghost from his past, or a stranger in a beautiful gown. She was an immovable force, her serenity, the calm eye of the storm that had just torn his life apart. The thousands of tiny diamonds on her Devereux gown seemed to glitter like a triumphant constellation, mocking him with their cold, celestial light. Was this all for revenge? He demanded, the question bursting from him, a desperate plea for an explanation his ego could process. The company, the dress, Finch, all of it. Did you spend a year plotting this? This elaborate scheme just to humiliate me? He needed it to be about him. The alternative, that he was merely a footnote in her story, was simply incomprehensible. Melanie looked at him, and a profound sadness softened the powerful composure of her features. It was the look of a teacher watching a student fail the simplest, most fundamental lesson. Oh, Diego, she said, her voice quiet, imbued not with malice, but with a weary clarity. You still don't get it, do you? After all this, you still believe the world revolves around you, that every action is either for you or against you. And she took a single deliberate step closer, her presence commanding the space between them. This was never about revenge. It was about resurrection. He saw her take a slow breath, gathering the story of her past year into a single powerful truth. When you left me, you did more than just end our marriage. You tried to erase me. You took my history. You took my confidence. You took the voice that told me I had value outside of being your wife. You told the world I wasn't enough, and for a long, quiet time, I believed you. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms you had abandoned. Her gaze was unblinking, forcing him to see the truth he had so long ignored. This past year wasn't about destroying you. It was about rebuilding me, from the foundation up. Her voice gained strength, each word a carefully laid brick in her new reality. Veritas art was born from my passion for truth and beauty, the very things you always dismissed as a quaint hobby. The donation was for my sister Clara, a defining part of my soul you never bothered to learn. And this dress, she glanced down at the magnificent creation, is not a weapon. It is a gift from a dear friend who saw my strength long before I could see it myself. It is a tribute to the memory of a love that was real and pure. She held his gaze, her final judgment, both merciful and absolute. This evening wasn't a plot against you, Diego. It was my announcement to myself, first and foremost, that I am no longer a supporting character in your story. I am the author of my own. She looked past him, then toward the wreckage he had made of his own life, embodied by the weeping figure of Tiffany. You surround yourself with reflections of your own ego, hoping their praise will convince you of your own greatness. But a hall of mirrors is still just an empty room. I truly hope for your sake that one day you find something real to put in it. With that, she turned. She did not storm off or flee. She simply ascended the grand staircase, her movements unhurried and regal. The train of Clara's constellation flowed behind her like a river of starlight, a breathtaking sight. The entire ballroom watched in silence, a collective, unspoken acknowledgement that they were witnessing not an ending, but a coronation. She never looked back. Diego Stafford stood alone, a statue in the middle of the ballroom. The buzzing chatter of the crowd slowly returned, but it sounded distant and distorted the noise of a world to which he no longer fully belonged. He was a king in a fallen kingdom, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of his pride, haunted by the devastating clarity of her final words. Melanie pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp embrace of the New York night. The air was clean, a welcome antidote to the cloying atmosphere of the gala. The city skyline blazed before her, a familiar panorama that suddenly felt new, a landscape of infinite possibility. She took a deep, shuddering breath, a breath of pure, unadulterated freedom. The weight of the past, the grief, the betrayal, the crushing inadequacy had finally been lifted. The magnificent gown, which had served as her armor for the battle, now felt light like a second skin. Its purpose was served. Her work was just beginning. Veritas Art needed her. The Clara Price Research Pavilion needed to be built. She smiled a genuine private smile. She had walked into the fire of her past and emerged, not burned but forged. Her new dawn was here, and it was brighter than all the city lights combined. And so the Starlight Gala ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, earth-shattering triumph of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Melanie Price walked into that ballroom as an ex-wife and walked out as a legend. This wasn't just a story about a revenge dress. It was a story about reclaiming one's narrative. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about the noise you make or the money you flaunt, but about the silent, unshakable strength you build when no one is watching. It's about turning your deepest pains into your greatest passions and realizing that your worth is never ever determined by the person who leaves you behind. What did you think of Melanie's incredible transformation? Were you cheering for her every step of the way? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories of empowerment and sweet, sweet victory, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales.